I'm back. I have the tiny microphone. This is going to be exciting. Here we go, folks. Week 3 Power Rankings. Let's go. So last week we did not have a Power Rankings. That's my fault. It was due to a time constraint that I was under. But hey, let's go ahead and do a quick recap of what we had for week 2. So that way we're all set for week 3. So starting off, we've got Saira taking up the top spot, moving up 4 spots to get there. Beating JP in a very high-scoring match, brought JP down. Warren shocked us all, brought himself up to 3rd. Nika and Otto dropped down to 4th. Zach carefully just making himself up to 5th here. Tristan staying at 6th. Tyler making his way up to 7th. I dropped like a rock down to 8th. Then you've got Nick and Lewis dropping 1 spot down to 9th. And Maria and Kelly staying at 10th. Once again, starting with the 10th place spot, we have Maria and Kelly. And we got to congratulate them because they will not be going winless this year. They got themselves their singular win so far this season. So clappy claps all around for them. Looking at this team, we'll start off with the quarterback, Josh Allen, getting another 32.02 point week. He actually did the exact same number of fantasy points in week 1. The only difference is this week he had 4 passing touchdowns and 263 passing yards. So they really relied on him in the air just to distribute the ball and slice and dice up that Jaguars offense. Moving on over to Chris Olave, he got 21.1 points off of 6 receptions, 86 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. The Saints actually played a competitive game against a competitive franchise in the Eagles, and they had to rely on Chris Olave, and sure enough, he came up big for them. Even though they lost, he came up big in the fantasy department, so you got to give your props to Chris Olave there. Jake Ferguson coming back from injury and really showing his stuff with 6 receptions and 95 receiving yards to get 15.9 points. And then Harrison Butker with 12.3 points, one of those 2 kickers in the controversial team here, getting 3 for 3 on his field goals and 1 for 2 with his extra points. Moving on over to the bench, we have Jawan Jennings, the monster himself, the clear red zone target for the 49ers. He had 12 targets, 11 of those were receptions, had 175 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns to get 48.2 points. That is unbelievable, folks. Unbelievable. And then, of course, Jake Moody, also on the 49ers, got 5.1 points, nearly half the points that Harrison Butker managed to get this past week. He was 1 for 2 on his field goals, but made every single one of the extra points from those Jawan Jennings touchdowns. So he's still there, maybe. Unfortunately, though, they are still the worst record in the league with just the singular win, and they've still got these 2 kickers. They really should just get rid of Moody at this point. Even though Moody's average is higher, Harrison Butker has shown that he's pretty damn consistent. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever that Moody should still be on this team come week 5, and if he is, I'm going to fucking throw a fit. Me, I'm going to be the one throwing a fit. So for right now, this team is 10th, and I'm not foaming at the mouth just yet. Just a little bit of foam. You can see a little bit of foam. Anyways, 10th place. Let's move on to number 9. Unfortunately, taking up that 9th place spot, we kind of had to address it. It's myself. Oh, this stings. Joe Burrow, 27.18 points as he tried to will the Bengals to victory this week. We're talking 324 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. That's unbelievable for the quarterback. It just wasn't enough for the Bengals to beat the Commies at home on Monday night. Then you got DK Metcalf with 21.6 points. He had 120 receiving yards and an absolute bomb for that 1 receiving touchdown. I think it was like 30 or 40 yards, something ridiculous like that. Garrett Wilson, 14.6 points on a Thursday night game, had 5 receptions, 33 yards, and finally got that touchdown. Starting to get that connection built up a little bit between him and Aaron Rodgers. We'll have to see how the season continues over there with the Jets. Cam Akers coming in for Joe Mixon, who's injured, had 9 carries for 21 yards, and the lone touchdown for the Texans as they got obliterated by the Vikings. And then, unfortunately, the big issue for myself, 3 players scored less than a point on this team. We got Jake Elliott, my kicker, getting a half a point because he missed an extra point. Very unfortunate there. Ramondre Stevenson, 0.3 points. The Jets basically did everything to stop the Patriots altogether. and he even had a fumble, which was very, very, very unfortunate. And then Mark Andrews got a singular target, and that singular target he did not catch, and so he ended up with 0 points, and so I want to die. But on the bright side, Tajay Spears got 10.3 points off of 4 receptions and 54 receiving yards, which could lead to something in games that the Titans are going to be looking to pass the ball more rather than run the ball. It seems like Tajay is going to be used more in that passing style offense rather than a running style offense. And then for my 2 wide receivers on IR, I've got Keenan Allen and AJ Brown. I don't really know when they're going to come back, but when they come back, maybe I get myself back up into the positives. Maybe I can get myself out of this rut here in number 9. But for now, I'm stuck. I've got to start thinking about potentially looking at trades here because I'm going to need something, and I'm going to need something quickly. Moving up a spot, and at number 8, we've got Nick and Lewis. They got Dak Prescott, my king. We love Dak Prescott. He got 31.68 points off of 379 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and 12 rushing yards to get himself 1 rushing touchdown. He tried his hardest to will the Cowboys to a victory against a run-heavy Ravens team, but unfortunately, with an amazing comeback, they just came up short. And you got to give your flowers to Dak Prescott. He did everything he could, but just came up short. Stephon Diggs, 20.56. He had 10 receptions for 94 receiving yards. He was getting the Texans so close to scoring a touchdown, but really couldn't amount to anything. In terms of the touchdown department, that was Cam Akers with the sole touchdown for the Texans, but still a respectful 20.56 points. Breece Hall, 18.8 points off of 54 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, as well as 4 receptions for 29 yards. What I would consider to be a pedestrian week for Breece Hall. He's just that good of a running back that you should come to expect this kind of production from him. He's kind of a monster like that. And then, of course, the Jets defense, we were talking about Ramondre Stevenson really suffering for my team. Well, he benefited today for Nick and Lewis with 1 fumble recovery, 7 sacks. They ended up getting 17.92 points as they only allowed 3 total points to the Patriots and their absolute destruction on Thursday night. Looking at this bench, Aaron Rodgers, 21.88 points. He had 281 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Really just kind of led the Jets offense. Good job by him. Hopefully we can see more of that production, specifically towards Garrett Wilson, wink, wink, hint, hint. And of course, Tyler Lockett getting a solid 10 points with 8 targets, 5 receptions, and 46 yards. All around, this was a good improvement week for Nick and Lewis, but they've still got a long ways to go. We'll have to see how the rest of this season develops, but we're seeing some positives here, and we got to acknowledge that. Staying at number 7, we've got our Redbird King himself, Mr. Tyler. And we'll start off right at the top with 2 Redbirds that were leading this team. Drake London, 19.1 points off of 6 receptions, 67 yards, and a touchdown. Great job by him. Then we've got Marvin Harrison Jr. with 17.9 points. That came off of 5 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown there as well. Bijan Robinson had a rather pedestrian game against the Chiefs. Had 16 carries for 31 yards. He did get a touchdown, as well as 2 receptions for 21 yards, but only ended up with 13.5 points. I guess I expect more out of Bijan Robinson. I've seen how explosive his production can be. Hopefully he can get back up into that 20-point range for him, but still a rather good week for him. And then, not to mention Jalen Hurts, 12.48 points. He did have 311 passing yards, which on the surface looks like a great week for the Eagles quarterback and should be a very high number. However, unfortunately, he did have 1 interception and 1 fumble. That took away 4 points. So instead of this being a 16.48 point week, we're ending up with a 12.48 point week. But that's okay. Looking over at the bench, there are plenty of other wide receiver options. We'll start with Scary Terry McLaurin here. 21.4 points as the Commies take down the Bengals. 4 receptions, 100 yards, a receiving touchdown for him. He really stepped up, especially now that they've moved Jahan Dotson out of the building. He's that clear wide receiver 1, and Jaden Daniels looked much better, and he had a great target in Terry McLaurin. Darnell Mooney, 14.9 points. He went 8 for 8. He caught every single one of his targets for 66 yards. Really just was a crucial key member for the Falcons offense as they tried to catch up and tried to beat the Chiefs on Sunday night. They just couldn't do it. And then, of course, T. Higgins was on the IR, but he did come back for this game. He had 3 receptions for 39 yards and totaled about 7.1 points, which is a good start as he comes back into the fold and the rotation with the Bengals. So right now, Tyler's locked in at 7. Hopefully he can make some moves. Hopefully, the Redbirds start moving their way up in the rankings, because if they don't, that's not only going to be a bad record for the 2 teams, the Cardinals and the Falcons, but that's also going to leave Tyler kind of outside the top 5 for a significant period of time. Coming in at number 6, and we're staying locked in here, we've got Tristan. And we'll start with Jamar Chase, who's come back into that elite performance form despite all the issues with the contract to start off the season. He had 6 receptions, 117 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Just an incredible performance by the Bengals wide receiver when they needed him. Moving over to Rashee Rice, he's still not arrested, he's still not suspended, and he got himself 30.9 points off of 12 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown against the Falcons. Then we got Alexander Mattison. He's the unique one because you see, Zamir White is the RB1 for this team, but Alexander Mattison is the pass-catching back that is taking this team by storm as they try to go more pass-heavy. He got 13.7 points with 7 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, and that big key number, 37 receiving yards for him. Fantastic job by Mattison this week. And then Nico Collins. He didn't have the best performance by a Texans wide receiver that went to Stephon Diggs, but it's still a very good performance. He got 4 receptions, 86 receiving yards to total 13 points. It's an off week for Nico Collins, but I expect him to come back into form next week. And hey, if he doesn't, you've got plenty of options on your bench. Kind of like Amari Cooper, who got 28 points this week off of 7 receptions, 86 yards, and 2 touchdowns to his name as the Browns tried to usurp a victory against the Giants. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful, and we'll get more into that a little bit later in this presentation. And then we've also got Chuba Hubbard with 30 points as they were playing the Raiders. Nobody expected any of this. They said, oh yeah, Bryce Young, he's a garbage quarterback. This team's going to suck with Andy Dalton because the Panthers are the problem. Well, I tell you what, folks, the Panthers aren't the problem, apparently, because Chuba Hubbard got 30 points off of 21 carries, 114 rushing yards, 5 receptions, 55 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. That is an unbelievable stat line by the running back. It seems like the Panthers are turning a new leaf, and that creates an opportunity for Tristan to be one of the highest point scorers this week. Hopefully he can keep that momentum up, and he'll be moving himself into the top 5 in no time. Speaking of that top 5, we've got a team that's been falling ever since week 1, unfortunately, and that is Nika and Otto. We'll start with Derrick Henry, the shining light for this team, got 32.2 points off of 151 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns as the Ravens basically ran the ball right over the Cowboys in their explosive victory. Even with the comeback, they still held on using the run. It seems like Derrick Henry is with the Ravens for good, basically. And if I'm a Ravens fan, I'm at least pretty happy about this situation. It seems like Derrick Henry's the answer to your running back problems. Moving on, Zach Charbonnet, another running back, 26.3 points. He had 91 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 receptions for 16 yards. Just an explosive week for him. Now that Kenneth Walker has been out, he's really had to step up and fulfill the role. He did so for the Seahawks this week. A very good job by him. Moving over to Patrick Mahomes, he had 17 points, 217 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He did get 1 interception, which stunted that nearly 20-point performance by Mahomes. But you know what? I bet Chris Collinsworth was ecstatic up in the booth for the entirety of the game. So, I mean, who could really complain about Mahomes at this point? Moving right along, Jordan Mason, that backup for CMC, he got 11.3 points off of 77 rushing yards, 2 receptions for 11 receiving yards. Not a very explosive week for him. It seemed like the 49ers were relying much more on Jawan Jennings this week. But you know what? You take 11.3 points every once in a while. It was still a good performance for Mason. And then the big issue here, both wide receivers combining for just 9 points. You got Michael Pittman. It seems like he's not the right answer for the Colts, getting 7.7 points. That could also just be Anthony Richardson not being great at throwing the ball. And then Jamison Williams only getting 1.3 points. They really just didn't rely on him that much this week as they did in prior weeks, especially in that game against the Rams. So we might have to see some retooling and some reconfiguration by Nika Otto. And they do have options. Christian Kirk got 16.4 points off of 10 targets, 8 receptions, and 79 yards for the Jaguars wide receiver. That may be a fluke. We don't really know. The Jags are a weird team right now, especially with Trevor Lawrence kind of being rocky at the moment. But Khalil Shakir with the 19.7, he had 6 receptions for 72 yards and a receiving touchdown. It seems like Shakir is slowly forming himself into that wide receiver 1 position that Nika Otto would need from a Bills wide receiver to make him viable to throw him into the lineup. And I think that could be a good potential option for them there. So they're still in the top 5, but they've really got to make some adjustments or we could see them falling out really soon. At number 4, we got someone who got a victory this week, but it was unfortunately the lowest scoring victory of the week, and that goes to Warren. See, Saquon Barkley was the leader of this offense, not only for the Eagles, but for Warren as well, with 35.3 points off of 147 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I don't know how long this crazy Saquon Barkley stat line is going to continue to exist. A.J. Brown might be coming back into the fold for the Eagles offense, but also Devontae Smith might be leaving due to injury. It's kind of all up in the air, so it'll be interesting to see if Saquon Barkley can produce at that same level. Additionally, Amon-Ra St. Brown with 21 points off of 7 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. When they needed him, he came in, gave a great performance, and that kind of rounds off the electric performances for Warren. It kind of goes downhill from here. CJ Stroud had a rather pedestrian week, actually a rather tough week, to be honest, against that Vikings defense. He had 250 passing yards and a passing touchdown, but unfortunately gave away 2 interceptions. Once again, that's 4 points. So this could have been a 15-point week for Warren with CJ Stroud, but it unfortunately ended with just a 10.5-point week for Warren there. And then Devontae Adams seems to not be the clear guy for the Raiders, and they were struggling this week against the Panthers, which I don't think anybody expected whatsoever. He had 9 targets with 4 receptions for 40 yards, only got 8.2 points. But if you're Warren, you're never freaking out. You always have options. You're always planning. You're 3 steps ahead. Like Deontay Johnson on the other side of that Raiders game. He was with the Panthers, got 27.8 points off of 8 receptions, 122 yards, and a touchdown. With Andy Dalton under center, it may be that Deontay Johnson is a viable wide receiver option for Warren. He could be using him in the lineup. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. Jared Goff is a potential substitute for CJ Stroud with 199 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception this week. We'll kind of have to see how the tides flow with CJ Stroud. If he comes back into form, maybe Jared Goff stays on the bench. If not, Jared Goff could be a very solid option to replace Stroud. And then Courtland Sutton, 14.3 points off of 11 targets, 7 receptions for 68 yards, as that Broncos team really tries to push into relevance with Bo Nix. They're trying to make it work, and Sutton just seemed like he was the right answer there. So right now, it was a rather low-scoring and ugly win for Warren, which puts him in that 4th place spot. But maybe a few adjustments and maybe a more positive and lucky week, and Warren can find himself back once again in the top 3. Speaking of number 3, we've got ourselves Zach. Let's talk about Jonathan Taylor for a minute, because that's kind of the crucial point for this team right now. Jonathan Taylor, 28.2 points off of 110 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. That was a great performance by the Colts running back. We haven't seen that so far out of him this season. He exploded. We love that. He's going to keep rolling, hopefully. And Zach Moss really was an unexpected option to be that RB2 and a clear point scorer for Zach this week. But hey, 21.5 points. You can't get too mad about that. 58 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, as well as 5 receptions for 39 receiving yards. They were using Zach Moss all over, and especially in garbage time with those receptions that really just pushed him over the edge for a nice 20-point week. Kyler Murray, 15.38 points. He had 207 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, and unfortunately 1 interception. But all in all, that's a relatively solid week for Kyler Murray. We'll have to see if he can produce a little bit more than that just to, keep him fantasy relevant for some guy like Zach. Otherwise, there might be a potential option in a guy like, I don't know, Jalen Hurts. We'll have to wait and see. Both wide receivers for Zach got over 15 points, and that was the real killer. That's the reason he managed to sneak his way into the top 3. DJ Moore, 15.5 points. Devonta Smith, 15.3 points. There is some concern here with Smith, though, because it looked like he did get injured towards the end of that game against the Saints. We'll have to see how that injury plays out, if he'll be back this week or if he may be sitting some time out. But there are options for Zach on the bench if that is the case. David Montgomery, 22.9 points. He had 105 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, as well as 3 receptions for 17 yards. That is the type of performance we like to see from the 1A, 1B, 1-2 punch that the Lions have in their running back room. And then Dallas Goedert. You see, the issue for Zach has been pretty consistently that Travis Kelce has not been anywhere close to being fantasy relevant for the Chiefs or for Zach in fantasy football. But that's okay, because Dallas Goedert got 28.5 points off of 10 receptions and 170 receiving yards. Maybe there's an opportunity for Zach to plug in Dallas Goedert and make some production happen, but we'll just have to wait and see. Right now, he's in the top 3. He's gunning for that top spot. I would be scared of this team because, it's Zach. There's always something to be scared about with Zach. Still locked in with number 2, we've got that son of a bitch, JT. Looking at this team, Jaden Daniels, a nearly 30-point game. He was all over, and he showed everybody out in the world that he can pass the ball. 254 passing yards with 2 passing touchdowns. 2 passing touchdowns. 39 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown for him. Just an explosive performance as they beat the Bengals. Aaron Jones, 27.4 points off of 19 carries, 102 yards. And a touchdown for him. Just a spectacular performance for the Vikings running back. Who could forget Justin Jefferson, part of that Vikings stack there. 20.7 points off of 6 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. And then the big thing, the other 2 running backs that were in the lineup for JP. Yeah, those 2 running backs scored over 16 points each. Jahmyr Gibbs got 16.8 and Alvin Kamara got 16.3, though Alvin Kamara is a little bit banged up. It's almost like I'm getting deja vu, like this happened on the last slide with the second person getting slightly injured. We'll have to see how Kamara plays out going into this week, but maybe we could see a little bit more Jamal Williams energy coming in the future for the Saints there. In terms of the wide receiver options on the bench, I mean, these are some performances for JP here. 24.9 points off of 6 receptions, 112 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. Who is that, you may ask? That's Rome Odunze, the rookie from Washington that's now with the Bears and has Caleb Williams throwing the ball. In a very ugly game, it seems like he kind of shined for the Bears there. And then Jacoby Myers, 21.6 points off of 7 receptions, 62 yards, and a receiving touchdown. JP is doing everything right. And honestly, there is no reason he shouldn't be ranked number 1 in this fantasy rankings. But look, folks, there's just that one team that's doing everything at the exact level of perfection that JP is doing, and they beat JP one week. And so unfortunately, JP stuck at that number 2 spot, but we all know who's coming at number 1. Let's not waste any time. Let's get into number 1. Number 1, guys, you know who it is. They've been unstoppable. Let's talk about Saira. Unfucking believable. Lamar Jackson, 26.9 points. He had 182 passing yards and a passing touchdown, had an 80% completion rate, and as well as 87 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. That's the Lamar Jackson we all know and love. It was a dirty and ugly game, but you know what? Hey, Ravens ended up beating the Cowboys. Got to give props to that. Kyron Williams, 32.4 points. It seems like without Puka and without Cooper Kupp in the lineup, Kyron Williams is going to be that guy. 89 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 27 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. That's just a great performance by the Rams running back right there. And then Malik Neighbors, this guy that we were counting out. We had a lot of questions because Daniel Jones was the quarterback. Well, it seems like the solution to Daniel Jones was Malik Neighbors, because this man got 28.8 points off of 8 receptions, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns as the Giants take down the Browns this week. And not only that, Malik Neighbors is now the number 1 receiver in the NFL for our fantasy rankings. So if you look under players and add players and everything, Malik Neighbors is number 1. The guy that's throwing him the ball is Daniel fucking Jones, this fucking goober right here. But yet, Malik Neighbors is still number one, folks. Keep that in mind. That is explosive. That is crazy. Chaos. Chris Godwin continuing to show that, he was a fantastic pickup for Saira. 17.8 points off of 6 receptions, 53 yards, and a touchdown. And then Travis Etienne Jr., 12.9 points off of 68 rushing yards, 4 receptions, for 17 yards. The Jaguars aren't looking great, but Travis Etienne is still fighting to keep himself fantasy relevant. But if that doesn't seem to be the right option for Saira, at least she has Najee Harris with 13.9 points this past week off of 70 rushing yards, 5 receptions for 16 yards. With that Steelers stack kind of playing into a little bit of advantage, there might be a good opportunity for Saira to kind of tweak her team and boast her performance as she continues to take the top spot in this league. And so to wrap things up with the rankings, let's start from the top here. We got Saira, then JP, Zach, Warren, and Nika and Otto rounding off that top 5. Moving over to that 6th place spot, we've got Tristan, Tyler, then Nick and Lewis, myself, and taking up the rear for a 3rd week in a row, we've got Maria and Kelly. If you enjoyed this week's Power Rankings, please make sure to give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and comment down below what you thought of this week's rankings, which teams should be higher, which teams should be lower. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next week for another set of Power Rankings. Bye!